bonds. It doesn't mean that we endorse, every soldier in the American Army's activities that day. We own car companies. We're not the ultimate court of justice. We simply buy investments that are properly and policed by governments, and then we do our good work through our donations. And so from time to time, a car company will do something wrong, or a bank might make a bad loan, or...
Well, you had this investigation by the LA Times in 2007, which was one of the darker moments in terms of publicity for the foundation.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, they suggested that you were investing millions...
They suggested they wrote a great article. Why did they suggest that?
They wrote
it was brilliant.
They wrote saying you're investing billions in Shell, in Exxon, in Chevron, in total, these oil companies which were blanketing the Niger Delta with pollution, while at the same time, and making children sick, they said, while at the same time you were doing your vaccine programs in the same area. And they said these two things contradicted each other. So did you actually change practices after that?
No, those oil companies are not out to make children sick, and nor is, whether we own 0.1% of them going to save any children's lives. So we're in a world of cause and effect. When we buy vaccines and get them out there, we're into saving lives. We're not into patting ourselves on the back that, oh, we don't own shares in that company. The most controversial thing we own are U.S. government bonds. I mean, I disagree with a lot of things the U.S. government does, and so how can I own their bonds? I've even owned Australian bonds. I mean, so no, I do not endorse every action of things that I own investments in, but nor are we the court of justice. We're not going to take our 1,000 people who are malaria experts, TB experts, and sit and go around and look at every oil company employee. I happen to know something about the Niger Delta situation that I don't blame them as actors at all, but the general point is that we're about our grants, and otherwise we're just a typical investor where the governments are setting the rules.
Okay, let's move on. Our next question is from Kashfia Rahman.
I hope my voice doesn't crack now. Mr. Gates, Dead Aid, book by Dambisa Moyo, illustrates that giving more aid in Africa over the course of the years did not elevate poverty. Instead, it kept the economy crippled, with governments asking for more aid. This flow made a cycle of aid giving, which resulted in nothing productive, and it has not been used to solve the immediate, nothing except solving the immediate problems, and the money is not being used to make businesses sustainable in Africa. What is the Foundation's view in this regard?
So there's obviously a question about whether aid in Africa has had negative consequences. There's been new analysis about that.
Well, it depends on your value system. Over the last 20 years, the number of children who die in Africa every year has been cut in half. And is that good or not good? It's largely due to vaccines and the aid programs that have been there in Africa. I think that that book actually did damage generosity of rich world countries. People have excused various cutbacks because of it.
You read the book, obviously. Did you?
Actually, yes.
Did you find anything? Did you find anything in it of use?
I found that she didn't know much about aid and what aid was doing, and she is an aid critic. There's not many, because it's moralistically a tough position to take, given what aid has been able to do. But if you look objectively at what aid has been able to do, you would never accuse it of creating dependency. Having children not die is not creating a dependency. Having children not be so sick they can't go to school, not having enough nutrition so their brains don't develop, that is not a dependency. That's an evil thing. And books like that they're promoting evil.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you. Our next question tonight comes from Professor Ian Fraser, whose research led to the development of the HPV vaccine against cervical cancer. Ian.
Mr. Gates, our research and your support for vaccines programs in the developing world have encouraged us to initiate a program to help prevent control cervical cancer in Vanuatu. a small Pacific island where cervical cancer happens to be the commonest cause of death amongst women. Vanuatu have committed to continue the programme when our funding support for that programme ceases. However, there's clearly an expectation that the funding will continue to come from outside of the country. Are we doing things wrong? Is it morally correct to support a programme which we know is going to come to an end unless there's continued outside support? And how can we make Vanuatu more responsible for looking after itself?
Yeah, I think before you undertake a program, it is important to look at whether there'll be ongoing support for that. In the case of HPV vaccine, the good news is that Gavi is now supporting some pilot programs where they fund the availability of HPV vaccine, and with enough donor generosity, they'll be able to make that a standard, the same way they have for pentavalent, and they're doing for rotavirus and pneumococcus. In fact, the next big vaccine they want to add to that list as they get the universal coverage of those out there, HPV, and there's a lot of excitement. Now, it's tricky because you have to give it a different age than the normal vaccination program, but the pilot programs are to look at, can you do that through the schools? How do you get people together? We've done pilots in India, which was actually a good thing that we learned from. So I think there's some very good plans to bring the prices down and to have this Gavi financing come in for the countries that want to get serious about HPV, moving towards a goal that this should be universally available.
Briefly back to Ian, are you concerned that some forms of aid are creating dependency?
It's not so much that they create dependency as that they create an expectation in the population that is difficult then to meet. The Gavi price for the HPV vaccine is still $5 a dose, and in Vanuatu, which is not Gavi eligible because it does a lot of banking for Australia, but still has a subsistence economy, $5 a dose is quite a lot of money.
Yeah, I don't know the economics of Vanuatu, why they can't tax the banking activity to buy a $5 vaccine. It seems like you could do that, but the price won't stay at $5. The price, there are different manufacturers who are going to come in and bring it down. Sadly, the price will come down partly because penetration in rich world hasn't gone up as quickly as was hoped for. So there's still a lot of work to do on HPV, including getting those new entrants in that we are financing some of that.
Okay, let's move on. Our next question comes from Catherine Murray.
Mr. Gates, some of the world's poorest countries are run by corrupt and often totalitarian leaders. How do you manage to support the people without supporting the government?
Well, we believe that vaccination should take place in every country, no matter what you think of the leader in that country. The children in that country deserve vaccines. So we've even been involved in helping get vaccines into North Korea, which, it's a contest, but you might think of that as the worst political leadership in the world today. Not many would compete with that. And so we're involved in all countries. Somalia, where there is no government, Eritrea, where the government's imperfect, you name it, we're in there trying to get vaccines out to the children.
And places where the workers themselves have been in danger, if not some of them killed. Well,
yeah, it's very tragic that even in the case of polio, in the last 6 months, the workers have been targeted, both in Pakistan and in Nigeria, and killed. Now, the workers have chosen to keep volunteering. New security things have been put in place. The government's really taken some very good steps. But those are real heroes that go out and get vaccines to children, even in the face of threats against their life.
Is this a particular issue with Islamist extremism in North Africa, which is becoming, and Pakistan obviously, which is becoming a lot worse?
Well, there's a group in Nigeria called Boko Haram, and what they think about this isn't totally clear. In the case of Pakistan and Afghanistan, we've actually had good luck where a lot of the Taliban groups have given so-called letters of passage where they say vaccinators can come in. They need to be convinced that it's not a plot by the U.S. government, and there were some things that confused that in terms of vaccination activities. And so maintaining that fragile trust that these people are there to help your kids and that's all they're going to do, it's never very easy. but it's actually looking pretty good right now in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Okay, let's move on again. We'll talk about something that's more fun. Our next question comes from Philippe Zander.
Firstly, on behalf of the International Health staff and students here today, we'd like to thank you for coming. My question is, since putting forward the condom challenge in which you are offering $100,000 startup funding to whoever creates a new condom that can protect and increase sexual pleasure, have there been any designs that are fulfilling expectations? And how significant of an effect do you think the new condom might have in decreasing rates of HIV and sexually transmissible infections across the globe, particularly the developing nations?
Yeah, we put out some pretty interesting challenges. And I don't know the status on that one. I think people are still sending in their things. What we do is we ask you to send in, we have new toilets, ways of delivering vaccines, all sorts of places where we're seeking the best ideas. And we ask people to send in a 2-page application. And in order to avoid committee thinking, we send them out to reviewers, and usually you'll get about 20. Whichever one you think is the best, that gets funded, no matter what any of the other reviewers think. And then you pick your 3 next ones, and then if that's from a poor country, it's automatically funded. Or if it's from a rich country, it takes 3 people to give it their second designation. So anyway, we've been able to finance a lot of pretty wild ideas.
How close are you to producing a better condom which produces
I don't know.
More pleasure?
I'll have them get back to you on that.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Sam Wood.
Mr. Gates, a topic that has not yet been broached tonight, but is nevertheless one that's quite important for our world at the moment, is the one of our environment. And you've said in the past that in order to stop global temperature rise, we must cut our total carbon footprint globally to 0, which would mean those in the third world must do so as well. How do you propose to cut the carbon footprint of those who already have the bare minimum in terms of industrial technology, which even now is not enough to properly sustain them?
Well, the key is not the CO2 emissions of the third world. If you think of the poorest countries, they're responsible for less than 5% of the carbon emission. And when I say the poorest, I don't mean the middle income. I don't mean Brazil, Mexico, China, Indonesia. I mean the 70 that are the very poorest. And so for them, it's such a small percentage that they should not have imposed upon them that they have to buy more expensive energy. They are the ones who will suffer the most, because it's actually tropical agricultural environments where the heating will cause the most starvation because of extreme crop failure. And so it's incumbent on the rest of the world to get CO2 emissions down. And it's a very urgent thing that requires us to fund innovation, to fund incentives. It's not an immediate problem, but it's a huge problem that you've got to act now to make a big difference.
Yep. There is a global fund, although it's running out of money, for health issues. Should there be a global fund for environmental issues to actually help this process?
I don't think a new mechanism is what's required. The thing you want to do that has the longest lead time is you want to increase research in energy R&D. And it's very disappointing that as people have taken money and subsidized various things, that the research on things that would be very economical hasn't increased. Even the US, if you look at the balance of research, and they're by far the biggest funder of energy research like many other categories, the amount of deployment money has been almost 10 times the research money, and the research has not gone up much. So I'm not sure a new mechanism is what's required.
Okay, let's move on. We have another question. It's from Amy Kimball.
Given that your charity focuses on providing better health for citizens in foreign countries, does it frustrate you that underprivileged citizens in the United States don't have access to an affordable healthcare system?
Yeah, well, fortunately, in the US, less than 1% of children under 5 die, and that's largely to the degree it happens because of premature birth. And so although we have a very inequitable situation, and we should certainly move towards universal health care, it's not really comparable to the situation in developing countries. That is, most kids get enough nutrition, that you don't have this 30 to 40% where their brains don't fully develop. So we have work to do as a country. We're kind of unique in the rich countries in terms of healthcare accessibility. We'd get the worst grade of all the different countries. We also manage to spend more than anybody else, so copying us may not be the best idea in this one area. But I do think the policies are moving in the right direction to give better health care. In fact, even for young people, the CHIPS coverage has gone up, and the new Obamacare thing will help with that quite a bit.
I was going to say, did you get involved in politics to this degree that Obamacare was hugely controversial? The Tea Party candidates basically said this is going to destroy the American economy and certainly the American health system. Did you get involved in politics then?
Well, I think if you're a rich person with a lot of ideas, you ought to be careful to pick a few ideas to kind of say that you know the answer. People get tired of listening to you if you think you have answers to too many things. And so the areas that I really have experience are issues related to education, issues related to foreign aid. And so although there are exceptions, I really, when I'm back in Congress, I try to talk to things that I'm working on full time. I know the scientists, I know the numbers, and rich world healthcare is different enough than what I've devoted my life to that I don't go in pretending to have the solution on that.
Okay, our next question is from Ben Park.
The Australian Indigenous population have a lower life expectancy of about 10 years compared to non-Indigenous Australians. This can be attributed to the disadvantages they face in areas of health, education and employment. These combined factors have led to an intergenerational cycle of disadvantage for Indigenous people. How do you see the best way to break this cycle of disadvantage?
Well, you should, it's interesting to think, are there countries who, for their Indigenous population, has done a good job? It's another case where I wouldn't say the U.S. has done a particularly good job. We have some strange things where we let them build casinos in some cases, and then they have so much money, they have the problems of having too much money. And that doesn't work very broadly because the vast population of Indigenous people aren't in those weird privileged circumstances. So, bringing them into a modern culture that requires certain things, having them retain their traditional values, those seem to create a bit of a paradox. I don't know examples, but you should study and say, did New Zealand do it well? Did parts of Europe do it well? Are there any examples of this? Certainly it's a worthy cause in terms of resources, creativity, smart people. Are the schools fantastic in those areas? Why is the healthcare not living up? What are the diseases that are at work there? What you're describing in terms of life expectancy, 10 years is a lot. For a lot of countries, it's more like 40 years or 50 years different, but clearly that should be worked on.
Let's move on. You're watching a special edition of Q&A with Bill Gates. Our next question comes from Ariane Jahiri.
In an episode of The Simpsons, a character made the following quote about the future when addressing cadets. The wars of the future will not be fought on the battlefield or at sea. They will be fought in space or possibly on top of a very tall mountain. In either case, most of the actual fighting will be done by small robots. And as you go forth today, remember always your duty is clear, to build and maintain those robots. While such a quote is supposed to be satirical, do you think one day robots doing human tasks such as fighting wars will become reality?
Well, we already have the equivalent of robots doing a lot of things. If you look at how farming was done historically and how it's done today, those are mechanical devices that are helping us out a lot. If you look at what a telephone operator used to do or what a typist used to do, we are proceeding to replace all sorts of rote labor with robots. And this is a progression that with vision, with speech recognition, with greater mobility, will span to a lot of new areas, and
including warfare, which I think is the point that that young man just made. And indeed, we have drones already. These robots flying over different countries, assassinating people. the future, according to futurologists who look at robotics, could be of tiny swarms, insect-sized drones able to infiltrate people's houses and kill them. And do you think about the future? Do you think about these kind of things, how it might look?
Well, today we have real insects invading people's homes. It's called malaria, and it actually does kill people. So I have a strange obsession with the present. I don't see robots as something that will lead to more war. We have to be careful to avoid war. In general, the trend has been quite phenomenal in that regard. Violence in general, particularly of that type, less genocide. There's an unbelievable book about this by Steven Pinker that really talks about the trend and how positive it's been. But robots are a good thing. Let's just use them for something other than war.
Next question is related to that. It comes from Jessica Lee.
Do you ever think that artificial intelligence will ever surpass the human mind? And if so, how would humanity handle it?
Well, it'd be very humbling. In certain respects, computers are far faster than we are today. Multiplying, perfect memory, and it's this wonderful auxiliary tool that lets us communicate and create the ability to simulate things. Try out a new car design and see how that's going to work, or a new nuclear reactor, look at how you would design drugs. Computer simulation is this mind-blowing advance that will increase the rate of innovation. And so, I do think that when the computer takes over certain tasks, that'll be tough for us. It will be a long time before you're matching the type of broad judgment that humans exercise in many different areas.
When you were younger, you predicted this could happen, that carbon-based life forms might not be unique.
Yeah, over time, the machines are going to get very smart. And like all modern things, we'll have to adjust to that. It's kind of an embarrassment of riches problem as opposed to the opposite that many people worry about in the future. And so I do believe it's a solvable problem. Now we have to avoid climate change and other problems before we'll even have this one to worry about.
Sure, but do you think artificial intelligence is doable?
Absolutely.
And how long do you think that could take?
Very hard to predict. At least 5 times as long as Ray Kurzweil says.
Okay, the next question is from Tobias Yao.
Hi, Bill. Thank you for answering my question. My question is, I was hoping to get your view on the constant use of smart devices by young people, excluding Microsoft products, of course. And how do you teach your kids?
Well, in terms of using, when does a kid get a phone, every parent has to make that judgment. When does a kid get to browse without you seeing their browsing history? That's something you can talk with your kids about, make a decision. Do your kids get to go into their rooms and Skype with anyone in any way? Actually, in our household, they are allowed to do that, but there's all these different judgment calls. The main thing that comes off is a kid is overusing the technology, some game or something like that. And actually, for our kids, they haven't gotten to the point where we've had to set limits on it. Now, they all said that every single classmate had phones years before we let them have phones. And we said that was good experience for them to go through. So, we're viewed as tough parents in terms of letting the kids have stuff at a young age. And then you teach them how to use it well and, expect them to use it responsibly like anything else.
Not surprisingly, there's a bit of curiosity about your family and how that works. Zach Solomon has a question for us.
You say you don't think it's a good thing for your children to have too much money. You're only giving them a small portion of your fortune, a paltry $10 million. That amount would be life-changing for most. Do you think that your sense of perspective has been skewed by your wealth?
Absolutely. I haven't mowed the lawn for a long time. I forget what it's like. I do wash the dishes every night, so there are certain rituals that are worth maintaining. What you'd like to do is have your kids have some freedom to pick what they want to do, but not so much freedom that they can't do something of importance. And that's a hard balance to strike. But I do think that having kids receive large sums of wealth actually has been more negative for them than positive, particularly if their friends think that, they think that. I think a kid should grow up knowing that they're going to have to make their own way in terms of finding work, and that they won't be giving out sums of money or just have all the money they'll need. And so far that philosophy has worked very well.
I presume you have heard of that robot called the dishwasher. Just doesn't matter. The next question is from Andrew Astaganov.
Mr. Gates, information technology is becoming very integrated deeply into our lives and brings new levels of convenience at the cost of privacy. Does it worry you that this technology will be misused in the future in terms of controlling human activity?
Yeah, as technology advances, there are things like privacy, which we've sort of had implicitly because people weren't very good at gathering information, where society will have to think more explicitly about what are the rules. If you've had a divorce trial, is that transcript generally available? If you've had tickets, should your neighbor be able to find out that you had a speeding ticket? If somebody's going to hire you as a bus driver, should they be able to find out you had a speeding ticket? What should your credit card company know? How far back should that go? And these are complex questions. We'll have to make sure that they're obeyed and that the tools work that way. Even questions like, should there be lots of cameras in an urban area? London's chosen to go in a direction where they have lots of cameras. It's actually worked very well for them in terms of stopping crime and improving things. Other cities, including some in the US, have been more reluctant to deploy that technology. And so it is one of the drawbacks against an overwhelming set of positive things in terms of staying in touch, learning, curiosity. Privacy is one of the things we're going to have to make sure we draw the line in the right way. And I think different countries will experiment with different ways of drawing it. When you get terrorists using the technology, you'll tend to say, okay, the state should be able to see a lot. Then when you get periods where that's not happening, then you'll tend to move towards individual privacy. And hopefully we can find a way that we achieve both.
You've got time for one last question. This one comes from Andrew Zhang.
Hi, Bill. It's a great pleasure to meet you. What are your thoughts on cryonics? Is it something you have personally considered? As a few months ago on Reddit, you mentioned that cheating death is on your bucket list, and you're probably the most viable candidate to beat death.
Cheating death is on your bucket list, is that true?
No, I'd like to live a long time, but I won't have myself cryogenically preserved or cloned or anything of the kind. Life is a great thing, but you got to make room for the people who come after you. So I won't try and cheat death. Just delay it as long as possible.
Well, thank you very much for this hour of your life. That is all we have time for. Please thank our guest, Bill Gates. Thank you. Thank you very much. And a special thanks to the Pacific Friends of the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis and Malaria, and everyone here at the University of New South Wales, including this great audience. Give yourselves a round of applause. You were terrific.